Welcome to Inner Noise episode 8. My name is Gabriella Jones and I'm a concert harpist based in London who's currently thinking about changing her title to musician and collaborator, but more on that to come. If you haven't listened to episode 7, you might want to ahead of this episode because I think it provides more context to why I'm thinking and speaking the way that I am. Since reading Ben Hutchinson's book and reflecting on language, I found myself thinking more deeply about how we communicate ideas, how that affects the world of marketing and how we are forming our own business strategy as musicians and creatives, but also as business people, and just generally communicating our creativity within music, outwardly, and in the arts in general. I think language really shapes how we perceive and describe so much, and I think in this day and age it's also prone to becoming a little bit repetitive and also diluted, especially in the age of social media and trend-driven content. So the phrase that I'm going to be talking about today in particular is pushing boundaries. It's a term frequently used by musicians and artists, but what does it truly mean? And how do we navigate the tension between authenticity and the pressure to appear to be innovative? This isn't coming from a place of judgment. I have definitely described myself in the past in ways which I thought would make me look better, make me look good enough, make me look bookable, make me look like, yeah, you really want me on your, or in your concert series rather. And maybe they weren't the best words to describe actually what I was doing and actually who I am. So I think as a creative in London, while the abundance of art and culture can be really inspiring, it's also really easy to feel like you're not doing enough or like you're not different. When so many others are excelling or doing interesting things in their own way, it can be challenging to carve out your own space. But perhaps doing something well with authenticity and excellence is enough. Okay, so in a world saturated with consumable content, we often hear the same language repeated across industries. I think certainly for myself, if I see people creating Instagram content, you often see similar phrases being used. I'm thinking things like delighted or honoured or all of these things, which of course we all are when we're doing something that we really enjoy or we care about. But I'm wondering if it would be really nice to just keep it more authentic and keep it in this sense of what you really feel about that performance or that particular event or that wedding or that recording session or that, experience with a really prominent orchestra. I think phrases like pushing boundaries have become buzzwords and they are perhaps losing their depth in all of that. The repetition can diminish the impact of truly groundbreaking work. And I think it's really important that we start to use and choose our language in a better way. And maybe it's through laziness that we just think, oh yeah, I really enjoyed it and I want to promote what I'm doing or tell people what I'm doing, rather than thinking about, oh, maybe someone will read this. And actually, I really enjoy longer form Instagram posts where people write a little more about actually what they've been doing. I think social media and algorithmic content really amplify trends, leading to this kind of homogenization of language. When everyone is using the same terms to describe their work, it becomes harder to distinguish between genuine experiences or innovation and like just kind of superficial claims. So I don't know. I mean, listen, this is all, maybe this sounds a little bit too deep for just using pushing boundaries or language, but I think it's really interesting to think about in terms of, as I said at the beginning, kind of marketing, etc. So what does to push boundaries mean? So I looked up the dictionary definition and it says pushing boundaries as challenging or extending the limits of what is accepted or possible, But in the context of music and art, this definition raises more questions than answers. Are we talking about personal boundaries, pushing our own creative limits, or industry standards, challenging the norms of the field? If it's the last one, what are those if it's the first one even, what are those personal boundaries and how are they being expanded? And if it's the latter, how is the industry being transformed by particular work? So this is really tricky because you could be potentially pushing your own personal boundaries. Like, for example, I'm working with a ballet dancer, and she comes from a super traditional school, very, very classically trained, but she works on contemporary ballet. And so her kind of style, and I'm only at the beginning of working with her, so more on this to come, hopefully. I'd love to do a podcast actually maybe with her talking about this. But I think that it's kind of stemming from that traditional school of dance into something slightly different. But then she was also explaining to me how, so for her that probably is pushing boundaries, or especially amongst her colleagues, maybe what she's doing would be seen to be pushing boundaries. However, somebody who, for example, I studied at Trinity Laban, and Laban is the dance part of the conservatoire, and she was telling me that really stems from their kind of school of teaching, really stems from this intention behind everything and the intention behind the movement and why we do what we do. And it's very, very contemporary, and maybe it's not so much on the kind of technical side of things and from a classical training point of view. So it was really interesting because in that way then, for them to push a boundary when you're already coming from the school of thought of something that is so kind of thought related, and how does that then become I'm not explaining myself well. How does the kind of thought and the intention get reflected into movement? That's what I was trying to say. That is then harder to push that boundary, because it feels like, well, if everybody is coming from that place of like this kind of avant-garde thought process, then it's harder in that sense. So that's the thing I'm talking about, personal boundaries. And then I guess industry ones are slightly easier, because I guess they're common grounds that everybody shares about how the industry is looking and shaped and what you're willing to do to really change something. So I think pushing boundaries in a way could be kind of defined in different ways within the context of music and art. Anyway, I was then thinking, like, why do we even say this? Is it not just enough just to say, oh, well, I've won this award and I'm good at this and I've done this, and kind of highlights of your CV and maybe some thoughtful words about yourself? Why do we need to use things like pushing boundaries or international acclaim or in demand, all of these big things? I think it's simpler in a way, isn't it, to just say you're pushing boundaries than to actually demonstrate it. It's very easy sometimes to use words but without actually like proving that you're doing that. Much easier to say than to do. The phrase can make your work sound more exciting without requiring any proof that you've done anything. And I've noticed this in promotional materials for concert series and festivals, where musicians are described, or maybe they're describing themselves, I don't know, as boundary pushers for playing maybe Janacek or Bartók instead of Haydn and Beethoven. So I don't know if that is what we're considering as pushing boundaries in 2025. It feels maybe like a little bit concerning. But then at the same time, going back to my point of like, if that is the kind of industry standard, a very popular string quartet is playing at a very well respected music festival, and usually they play Haydn and Beethoven, then yeah, maybe actually this Bartók string quartet or this Janacek is actually pushing boundaries. So I am kind of well aware of that. I think in true Inner Noise style, I'm kind of putting out lots of questions and not many answers here. I think the music industry often rewards novelty and differentiation, even if it's a little bit superficial. and it can sometimes create pressure for artists to frame their work as revolutionary regardless of its actual impact. And I really hope that makes sense. Like sometimes I feel like, you know, there's kind of this glass ceiling a little, but every now and again they'll just allow a little something quirky and different, and then maybe sometimes it's like, oh, that's really sellable, but maybe actually the actual continuation of a project or continuation of something that is very different and very innovative maybe doesn't ever get really pushed, and it kind of falls into this void. And I wonder as well if something that's just even slightly different, is it pushed because it's slightly different, and it's like, okay, we're ticking the box of something slightly different, but it's maybe not actually impactful really, apart from in a superficial way. I think experimenting with new sounds and technology can feel innovative, but I wonder if it fundamentally challenges the status quo. And I think, you know, true innovation often involves rethinking the actual structure, purpose, or cultural impact of what we're doing. I wonder if as artists we can simply respond to cultural shifts and movements through our art rather than constantly striving to challenge or innovate. Perhaps the real work lies in creating spaces, festivals, networks, events where the industry consistently supports and amplifies these responses to things that are happening. So I think what I was feeling is when you think about challenging or innovating, it can feel like a lot of hard work. And of course it is, because you're going against something or you're pushing through something that has kind of maybe been a structure or a theme in place for a really long time. But I was wondering if, you know, actually generally the industry around the creatives just need to be really open to responses from creatives of cultural, societal shifts in order to allow a space, and a good space and a well-funded space for musicians and artists and creatives to create in reflection of that. And so it's constantly evolving, this constant movement. I think we could learn a lot from other entertainment industries, you know, film, general media, probably social media too, in this kind of more digital age, around that. You know, sometimes things really do feel old school, and I don't think we should be scared about expressing views on cultural, political, societal shifts, etc. And I think that brings me on to kind of funding and the industry's role in all of this. I think at the moment, I've mentioned on London Diaries quite a lot, and possibly on here too, that I'm applying for funding. And it's eye-opening to see how many funds are available for diverse projects and outreach. But it makes me wonder what percentage of funding is allocated to these initiatives and how much it genuinely is impactful. Because I think sometimes the outreach efforts I see from musicians feels minimal compared to the financial assistance available. So I do see big projects, and the music world in comparison to other industries and other little worlds going on is super tight knit, and I sometimes feel like, gosh, there's all this funding available, and is it that people are not able to apply for it because it's a kind of chicken and egg situation, because you kind of have to have a viable project to apply for outreach, but equally you need to kind of have done that project, but maybe the funding isn't available for that viable project that then could be extended to outreach. And then it made me think, are people applying for funding for outreach and not doing as much as what they actually should be in reflection of the amount of money they're getting, and rather just ticking boxes so they can actually do the viable project? And then it makes me think, okay, well, is this driving real change? Like, what's happening? And it just leads me to more questions, because I'm thinking, does the industry truly encourage boundary pushing? So while innovation is celebrated in theory, the reality often prioritizes marketability and kind of safety, maybe. I'm thinking more here for like maybe a record label. Truly boundary pushing work may struggle to find support unless it aligns with current trends or commercial viability. And I think it's hard to keep creating innovatively without financial backing. That is the reality, and the support of larger organisations. So I think this is all food for thought. Gosh, I feel bad throwing all these questions out into the ether all the time. Maybe next episode I'll just say these are categorical statements and facts that I truly believe, and something that I have no questions for. It's just factual. I don't know what topic that'll be. Anyway, being unconventional or experimental doesn't necessarily mean you're pushing boundaries. So I think this comes back to, again, the question of what is this? I think it's the question of maybe pushing boundaries versus actually just doing something different. If your work remains within a niche scene or genre, is it truly challenging broader norms? For example, things that are niche and different, they can exist within their own little realm of the industry. And I think that, as I was saying before, but I didn't fully go into detail, contemporary classical music is often rejected by popular record labels because it doesn't align with mainstream tastes. So does pushing boundaries require a diluting of a genre's, I guess, based on popularity? I've said that totally wrong, haven't I? I think, does pushing boundaries require diluting a genre for popularity, is what I was trying to say. Or should it remain true in its essence, even if it means reaching a smaller audience? And that's something I've definitely been thinking of, because I'm recording a project this year, and I just keep thinking, I don't care if this only gets 20 streams on Spotify. I just really want this project to be recorded. I want there to be a legacy. I want there to be an audio recording of all of the work that I've put in, and I want it to grow from that point. I want it to be a point of reference, and I don't care about 1 million streams, because that's fine. There is fantastic music of so many genres that have 3,000 streams, and it's like absolutely brilliant. And I think that shouldn't diminish it. The numbers shouldn't diminish it. It is about what it is and where the places come from, and that's really important to me and my values as an artist. Are artists only allowed to be different if their work aligns with trends? That was something I was really thinking. I was thinking, it makes me think of like 10 years ago, or even like 5 years ago. When was COVID? COVID was 2020. Okay, so maybe 10 years ago, let's say. During COVID, we had that huge Black Lives Matter movement, and there was a big shift, I felt, in the UK, I'm speaking specifically, where you saw more black and ethnic minority groups being programmed in big concert halls by very prominent musicians, by prominent orchestras, and it was so wonderful. But I don't recall that being something that was happening 10 years ago. And so that was something prominent that happened, and long may it continue. But it did make me think, if it felt this alignment with a big movement that happened, and a big kind of, it was all over social media. It was like a really kind of big moment. COVID was a big moment, but this particular Black Lives Matter movement was really big. And I feel like, gosh, would we have ever had this kind of change in our programming had we not all started talking about it? So maybe it's like this collective thing of we all need to start doing it. It's like an industry standard that was kind of created, and of course there's still work to be done, but it's really great to see. But it made me think about, the the alignment with something happening or something. I don't want to say it's a trend because it's an incredibly important like cultural movement, and I'm using the word cultural movement, but I'm thinking of maybe that's the wrong way of defining it, so I do apologize for that. But I think more I'm thinking of something that should be something that eyes are on all the time, but it was just prominent particularly in that one period of time, that there seemed to be like all of the world's eyes were on it. And so that's why I'm saying trend, because I'm thinking of, do you remember the black squares on Instagram that everyone put up? It kind of, that was a trend, wasn't it? That wasn't, that was a statement, but it was also something that everyone was doing because everybody else was doing it. So I wonder if that kind of period allowed for something to come out of it in that way, and of course in a really good way, and as I said, long may it continue. But what happens to those who challenge norms but don't fit into the current cultural moment? So I'm thinking of, maybe here I'm thinking of transgender musicians, transgender composers, and I guess if we look at political statements that are being made about transgender rights and transgender people, is where does that fit in with VR and with culture? Though I do feel creatives are so much more accepting, especially kind of my generation, a younger generation. I have never experienced discrimination from, well, maybe it's because I've got wonderful, lovely colleagues and friends in the industry, but I've always experienced a huge amount of openness and discussion and love and acceptance, I think, for these things, but for these topics, and I think that I wonder, in other places and other nations where things are not so accepted, does that mean that then they miss out on a possible cultural moment within their creative space and aspects of their creative work, because of it not fitting in, and so they wouldn't be able to challenge a norm? Or maybe they do, but maybe it doesn't get quite the it isn't as impactful as maybe it should be or would be in another place. Anyway, gosh, lots of thoughts there. I'm after I record these episodes, I always feel like I need to not talk to somebody for like a whole day, or anyone for a whole day, which is not possible today, sadly. So might have to have a little lie down after recording this. So I guess I was thinking then, in the last 100 years, because it's always really easy to think about current, like really where we are now. But I was thinking about, okay, in 100 years, 1925 to 2025, and I was thinking about composers or musicians that have pushed boundaries, in my opinion. I was thinking kind of in the 1920s, 1950s, Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, like his neoclassical work, Symphony of Psalms, reimagining Baroque and classical forms with modern dissonance and rhythmic complexity. Schoenberg, a pioneer of atonal and 12-tone technique. I think just pushing the boundary of harmonic language and emotional expression in this way. Gosh, and thinking about that music, I've listed some music here which I'm not going to talk about, but it was just for my own thoughts. But I was just thinking, thinking about the 1920s and 40s, etc. And I'm just thinking about hearing that music during that time, just kind of struck me then. And then moving on, like 1960s, 1980s, John Cage's 4 minutes 33, just redefining the concept of music itself, emphasizing silence, ambient sound as integral to a listening experience. I always really thought that this piece was just like, what is this? Because I think people always make a joke out of it, but actually, if you really deep the piece, it's actually brilliant, because if you set it up, kind of anything could be 4 minutes 33. And I was actually thinking of creating a 4 minutes 33 myself, because I thought it might be like a really interesting experience, but I wanted to research it a bit more. So I'm saying that kind of loosely, anything could be, but I really would love to do a cage 4 minutes 33. Anyway, and then I was thinking of Stockhausen, a leader in, his own kind of, I guess, electronic music, like, integrated tape manipulation and like spatial sound, and pushing the boundaries of what classical music could also sound like. And then I was thinking of identity and politics and presentation, and I was just thinking about really now someone that I think is celebrated a lot, I guess, is Lily Boulanger and her sister Nadia. And I think her dates were 1887 to 1979, and as she was kind of known for being a teacher, but I think she challenged gender norms in a male dominated field. And people will know Aaron Copland and Philip Glass, but she mentored them as composers, and we don't often hear that spoken about, and that would have been so different for the time. And then I was thinking about Britain's operas like Peter Grimes and Billy Budd as well, tackling themes of social alienation and morality. And then I was thinking of Caroline Shaw, who was born in 1982, and she blends classical, folk and experimental elements, and it feels like she really kind of started redefining, or she was redefining vocal music. And then I was thinking about, because I think I touched on this a little as well previously in this episode, marginalised voices in classical music, like Florence Price, the first African American woman to have her symphony performed by a major orchestra. Her dates were 1887 to 1953. I think Price blended classical forms with African American spirituals like really, really well. And then I hope I'm saying this right, Un Suk Chin, who was born in 1961, a South Korean composer who fuses Western classical traditions and East Asian influences. And then moving on to somebody that I don't know too much about, but I did a little bit of research on, Julius Eastman, a gay African-American composer, minimalist works exploring themes of identity and politics. So, what's really interesting though is there's a lot of things that are like the first there, but it begs the question of like, what happens when you're not the first in these contexts of things? How do you, or are you part of the push? Takes a first, and then you're still part of the push, because Florence Price, the first African American to have her symphony performed by a major orchestra. But then it's like, okay, how many times has that been performed, and how many African American women conduct? How many African American women are in orchestras? How much representation do we see? Because that's still pushing boundaries. It's not necessarily that you have to be the first to have pushed it and to have been recognised. It's actually the continuation of that. I think that is of so much importance. So then I'm coming back now. This is my next subtitle. Authenticity versus innovation. In such a hyper-competitive industry, there's an immense pressure to stand out. And I think especially if you live in somewhere like New York, London, Paris, Berlin, maybe not Berlin though, the music scene in Berlin is very different to London. So maybe it's not really comparable, but I wonder if this pressure is leading us to prioritise novelty over authenticity. And perhaps actually there's more value in focusing on creating work that is true to ourselves and of excellence, even if it doesn't claim to be revolutionary, doing something well and with integrity can be just as impactful as trying to be different for the sake of it. I think as a harpist and a musician, I've just been thinking a lot about who I am and who I want to be, and it's easy to lose sight of your own voice when you're constantly exposed to brilliance of other people. But I think staying true to your own artistic vision is a form of success in itself. And so maybe that's something to consider. I'm having my website updated bit by bit. So if you go on it, you might think, oh, this is a little bit of a mess. But the software engineer is doing it bit by bit and leaving the website live. But I have recently revised my biography, and I really wanted to consider like who I am, what I've done, but also where I'm going. And I've really been thinking and considering all of these things, like, am I really doing something different, or am I just doing something that feels natural to me and something that I really want to expand on? And actually I decided that the important thing to me, the thing that I valued the highest, was doing something of excellent standard that I felt like really reflected me as a person, me as a musician, and the way that I wish for my work and my creative output to be seen. And actually being different doesn't really matter, because actually in so many ways I am very similar to a lot of harpists and a lot of musicians. So there's no point in kind of nitpicking myself and trying to find the thing that's different, because actually I think being similar is okay. I just want everything that I'm doing to be of quality and be authentic to who I am. Anyway, I think in conclusion, the words that we use to describe ourselves and our work really matter. They shape how others perceive us, but they also shape how we perceive ourselves. And coming back to a more holistic point of view, I think that's really important, because the outer noise can really affect the inner noise. I think being intentional with language can help us stay grounded in our authenticity, whether you're building a client base, exploring new creative directions, or reflecting on your next decade in the industry, which feels so scary. Success isn't just about external validation. It's about feeling artistically fulfilled, driven, and happy in our work. I think if you're unsure of who you are as an artist, take the time to reflect. I think don't worry, but just act with mindfulness and think with mindfulness. Authenticity and passion are the foundations of a sustainable and fulfilling creative journey. Anyway, what a nice way to end this podcast. Thank you for listening. I have another idea, but I'm going to be bulk recording episodes in the coming week. The next idea is really tricky because it's stemming from a podcast I listened to about AI in business, and I'm trying so desperately to think about ways that we can use it in music to really assist us, and it's proving difficult because the values I hold around music creation in itself. But I'm really trying to think out the box for that one, because I think it could be really interesting, because I think in this industry at this present time we work so hard as creatives, and if you're self-employed, if you're not working, you're not making money. And I think it's really, really important to be business minded and be strategists. And I want to kind of discuss that. But what I wanted to know was if anyone's listening, and had some ideas of what I could record, or any topics or anything that I've mentioned that you feel like I could go into more depth in. Please send me a message on @innernoisepod on Instagram. I paused there because I can't remember the Instagram handle, or also on my harp account, which is @gjonesharp. Anyway, thank you for listening. Bye.